Unlike the multisensorial experiences afforded in natural landscapes, our cities are defined by and communicate with us through features that have strong visual presence. What oral or technical elements would you like to add to your city?
I do think it's hearing life, and by that I think not hearing cars, not hearing sort of the mechanized world around us, so that in every city there are birds, in every city there's flowing water, there's every city there are things of the world and nature around us to be able to be perceived. And too often they're just kind of overwhelmed and drowned out by the other bustling sounds of the noisy industrialized city that we have today. So the ability to think about what the city is going to hear about with all electric vehicles and all electric tools and things becoming quieter, and being able to then let all the signal of life that's been drowned out by all the noise, to let that signal come back, of the signal of life and of nature. And even in our densest urban places, to have those reminders that sort of touch our hearts, our minds, our souls, and sort of give us a sense of peace and calm.
How can architectural pedagogy be revised to make it easier for those with disabilities to understand, engage, and practice the profession?
The biggest challenge to the teaching profession and to pedagogies and architecture and design, ironically, is for the professors, for the administration, to think more creatively. And it's an ironic thing to have to say about profession, a way of thinking that we like to call and consider of the most creative professions. But we get a little traditional and a little stuck in our ways in terms of how things are done. And to think about a student that is blind, and maybe one that's never ever seen the world around, is that to say they have nothing to offer the built environment? What can we learn from these totally radically different experiences that can offer a view of the same world that we all live in, but we've never seen that way? And when approached through that lens, how can the work that comes from that experience, and perhaps stirred up with or mixed in with the experiences of others, to really make it a richer, I want to say jambalaya, of a richer stew that's got great spice and all sorts of wonderful things that actually just makes it that much richer for everyone through the benefit of that. And so if the pedagogy doesn't allow for it, if the pedagogy and those in control of it don't have that creative mindset to say, oh, you can't do that if you can't see, to then turn it around to say, oh, what have I been missing? What have we been missing here? Because we can see and we can't get past what we can see. And so I think really welcoming and empowering these different voices in our schools, in the midst of the pedagogy, to really change the conversation, to really make it a more inclusive place for the benefit of a more inclusive environment, for a more inclusive future.
Tell us about some buildings and spaces that have managed to stimulate all your senses.
No one building or environment comes to mind that does that, especially as a built environment. But there are some that I think would do that, but I haven't had the chance to go there. I've had one that always comes to mind as starting to get there, and that is the Kimball Art Museum in Dallas-Fort Worth, Texas. And it was designed by the modern iconic architect, Louis Kahn. And it's a space that I knew visually, but had never visited in person, and had the opportunity to go there after I lost my sight. And I was really excited to go there because in thinking about the Kimball Art Museum, they have these vaulted spaces that define all the galleries, and a whole series of vaults at different lengths in different sequences. And I thought it would be incredibly rich to go in and hear the architecture, knowing what I could see in my mind, but to be hearing it through experiencing the building through my ears. And as I walked through it, and I was actually really disappointed when I got there because I couldn't hear the space. It was completely dead. I couldn't hear. I thought for sure I would hear the vaults overhead and hear how it would move the sound through the space. I couldn't hear anything. But I could pick up some other details of sort of a pattern within the floor of the galleries. We had wood floors, and then I remember through the architecture and studying it, the structural grid had travertine stone tiles on that structural grid, which started to modulate the space, taking a big, long space into knowable sections that you could sense as you moved through it, and you could feel it as you stepped on it, and I could hear it when I tapped my cane on it. So there were things like that were interesting, but then at one point I finally turned off the gallery to go out a side door that went to the exterior. And within one cane tap, my cane, the steel tip hit the ground, and I could hear the whole length of that vault going out both sides, and able to get, all of a sudden I could hear the proportions of that space. And so the first thought was, oh my gosh, what happened? And then it made me think, oh, the acoustic engineers were busily at work on the inside, making it a quiet gallery. And they kind of neutered the architecture. They were so successful that they killed how the building could speak, how the building could give resonance and a sort of sensory presence to the space, even though he had some things that were working in the ground plane. But then in that patio space with the vault overhead, it was also then capturing the sound of people in a courtyard walking on a crushed gravel path. And you could hear that crunching of the gravel as it reverberated in the vault. And I could really hear that as if they were right next to me, and how that really sort of pulled the sound. And then you could hear the trickling of water out in that courtyard. And it was the shape of the architecture that was pulling that sound forward. So, that to me was a place that was sensory rich. Perhaps it could have been richer if the engineers hadn't worked so hard on it, making it quiet.
In traditional examples of architecture, spaces could direct the motion of wind and sound, a phenomena lacking today. What are some of these fundamental elements that you would like to witness again? And what are few things that you intend to bring back through your practice?
My mind is racing with so many possibilities, but in terms of that core question of how do I design, I guess I'll think of it as how I design differently now, having had the benefit of losing my sense of sight. And as I say, referring to it as crossing the visual divide and trying to imagine architecture and the city and the environment in a different way. And it's not what one might think of the absence of sight, the absence of vision. That's an incredibly powerful, rich, and impactful thing. But if left only to that one sense, it's a very unsatisfying experience, because it's not like our eyeballs go on a tour of the environment of a building, of a city, without being within the body it's connected to. So all these other senses come in, and that's what makes the difference between real reality and virtual reality, of living inside an ocular goggles and just having this impression of the world around you, that it's an impactful thing. thing where all these other senses, they connect more with the body. They're things that are more immediate, more impactful. The gaze, the sight, it's the most detached sense of all of them that we have. And so by designing more deliberately and more specifically to those other experiences, to the sense of touch, the sense of sound, the sense of smell, the sense of taste, all those things that sort of just bring it, and even more so, it's like talk about hearing the wind, the direction of wind or the flow of water. When I walk around a city or down a street, I'm thinking of being like a drop of water following gravity as it moves down a hillside or a slope, and sort of bringing all that experience into just a much richer environment that on one hand, it's richer. On the other, it's something that provides multiple modalities of people to understand and appreciate the environment. So if you can't hear, then there's something else that you can work with. If you can't see, you have something else you can work with. But it's not a system of depravity. It's a system of richness that can communicate in many different ways that's equitable for all.
Beyond the built environment, we think of words such as vision and mission. Do you think we also have to consider the communication aspect of this and recalibrate our vocabulary?
I think that the idea of vision and mission, it's the vision. I struggle with that. I've often thought, great, as a very deliberate of saying, I'm not an architect without vision. It's like, okay, if that's the case, party's over. Go home. As an architect, you got to have vision, and as opposed to sight. Yeah, I have no sight, but I like to think I have plenty of vision, and that vision isn't just what you see in the world around you. It's what you see in your mind, see in your head, and that's the space that we all work within as designers. It exists in our thoughts, and then we express it through different ways of representing and developing those thoughts. So, I'm not afraid of using the word vision, but also recognize it needs to go beyond that into something that is, when you start thinking about mission, it starts taking it into a space that gives it reason and gives it presence and relevancy to others around you as part of that, part of an enterprise. That it's not just a vision for the sake of vision for the sake of the visual. It's really more of a larger mission, whatever that mission is that you're articulating.
What's next for you?
There's a project that I'm working on now that I'm really excited about, and it's one of the most challenging projects I've worked on, and it's a school. It's a campus that's going to serve a school for the blind and a school for the deaf, and it's going to be for children from the ages of kindergarten through high school and up to the age of 21. So it's for children, youth that are deaf in one school and blind in another. And many of those students are going to have multiple disabilities, not just the sight or the hearing. So they're very different, divergent experiences. Those students that are there for the school for the deaf, they're learning to communicate in sign language, which doesn't work if you can't see. So by its definition, you have these two groups of kids together that can't communicate effectively. But through the wonderful delight of kids, there are ways that they can push through that. And there are technologies to enable it. But in reality, they're two different schools. But the opportunity there is, in this case, I'm working with another architect who's deaf and has been deaf all his life and specializes in schools for the deaf. So we're getting to really sort of bring these two different experiences together to really entwine them together, to make sense of it, something that works for both communities, not at the expense of the other, and all of it in a context that's about setting up kids for their future, for their ambitions, to empower their passions, their dreams, their loves, to really just supercharge their perception of their future and their ability to contribute. So to me, it's a really rich and wonderful thing that's so much about the future and so much about harmonizing between different experiences.
The UIA 2023 theme is Sustainable Futures, Leave No One Behind. What constitutes all or everyone through the lens of your practice?
When I think of leaving no one behind, it's basically leaving no human behind. At its core, I think about blindness or the loss of hearing or a mobility impairment or a neurodiverse condition. That's normal. That's part of the human condition. That ability is it's transitional. It comes and goes, and it's actually sort of reaffirms the human life of the sort of the vulnerability of us as humans, but also of our resiliency to survive and thrive and succeed. So as we're learning to be able to live and contribute and to participate in communities, then when we think about resilient communities and leaving no one behind, it's because everyone has something to offer, something to contribute, and it's imperative on everyone to hear those voices, to hear those experiences, and to learn from those experiences. Because I think hearing that, having those conversations, and leaving no one behind, it's to everyone's benefit. It's not just to the benefit of those who might have a disability or a difference.